I'd like to thank Dan Lichty and Carrie Snyder and Tom Reimer for inviting me to develop a service around poetry. Poet Lucille Clifton once remarked that poetry speaks to the great hunger of the soul. There was a time when poetry was everywhere, not only in books and chapbooks, but also in ephemeral print media like newspapers and magazines. We need to look a little harder for it now, but it's still all around us. Just this past 6 weeks or so, I've seen a number of poetry collections by old friends and a lot of new poetry by new poets, too. Award-winning BC poet Eve Joseph recently launched a fabulous chapbook that includes a short, pithy prose poem in which she invokes that iconic Canadian image of the loon. I miss the early days of poetry when the world spoke to me, she writes, when the quality of attention was more important than the poem itself. Not the loon, but the surface of the water after the dive. That's how poetry often works. The poem is less the thing than is the ineffable, indelible impact it leaves. Not the loon, but the surface of the water after the dive. I love poetry. I love the epiphanic moment when I'm compelled to say, exactly, this is true, I understand it. Maybe less with my mind than with my heart and soul. It says what I might have said, what I wish I could have said, had I had the words to say it. In poetry, as Richard Rorty has remarked, we speak differently. In poetry, we often come to understand deeply, for the first time, gestures and habits that make up our day-to-day lives. Poetry often gives us words to say what many of us intuitively comprehend but seem unable to express. Poetry condenses experience. It has the power to offer profound insight. Poetry awakens our sense of our own and others' humanity. It enhances empathy. Consider this poem, little poem by Michael Ondaatje, a tender evocation of a generic experience every parent or grandparent of a toddler would recognize, entitled Bear Hug. The poem is about the poet's son, Griffin. Griffin calls to come and kiss him goodnight. I yell, okay, finish something I'm doing, then something else. Walk slowly around the corner to my son's room. He is standing, arms outstretched, waiting for a bear hug, grinning. Why do I give my emotion an animal's name, give it that dark squeeze of death? This is the hug which collects all his small bones and his warm neck against me. The thin, tough body under the pajamas locks to me like a magnet of blood. How long was he standing there before I came? I love poetry, not all poetry. We all know that not all poetry speaks to everyone. I find when I pick up a book of poems, which I do often, I'm compelled to reread only a few of them, but those few feed my spirit. Often they inspire, invigorate, stimulate me over and over again. Even something very old and sweet and affecting, like this short, simple, tender lyric written by Wordsworth over 200 years ago, about Lucy. She dwelt among the untrodden ways, beside the springs of Dove, a maid whom there were none to praise and very few to love. A violet by a mossy stone, half hidden from the eye, fair as a star when only one is shining in the sky. She lived unknown, and few could know when Lucy ceased to be. But she is in her grave, and oh, the difference to me. In poems, we can allow that the world is imperfect. We can express loss and regret, but at the same time, we can implicitly or explicitly make declarations about the beauty and grace the world offers. Here's another simple poem, this one rooted in Canadian Mennonite tradition, by Di Brandt, who identifies things that evoked anxiety in her when she was a child, while it also celebrates the natural beauty of her rural prairie home. what she once called the real world of flower gardens and apple trees and green villages, both gentle and proud. Brant chose to open her recent collection of new and selected poems called The Sweetest Dance on Earth with this evocative lyric. When I was 5, I thought heaven was located in the hayloft of our barn. The ladder to get up there was straight and narrow, like the Bible said. And if you fell off, you might land on the horns of a cow or be smashed on cement. The men in the family could leap up in seconds wielding pitchforks. My mother never even tried. And for us children, it was hard labor. I was the scaredy. I couldn't reach the first rung, so I stood at the bottom and imagined what heaven was like. There was my grandfather with his Santa Claus beard sitting on a wooden throne among straw bales, never saying a word, but smiling and patting us on the head and handing out bubble gum to those who were good. Even though his eyes were half closed, he could see right inside your head. So I squirmed my way to the back of the line and unwished the little white lie I had told, which I could feel going grimy up there, and tried not to look at the dark gaping hole where they shoved out black sinners like me. But the best part was the smell of new pitched hay wafting about. Some of it fell to where I stood under the ladder. There were tiny blue flowerets pressed on dry stems. I held them to my nose and breathed in deep sigh and sun. It was enough heaven for me for one day. I love poetry. You could say I believe in it and the way it encourages, enables us to comprehend things with our hearts, the way it can help us to move beyond conventional ways of understanding. Poetry offers us alternative ways to convey what we might feel most deeply and to grasp the joy or pain, serenity or loss of others. Sarah Clausen, a Mennonite writer from Winnipeg, still active as a poet in her mid-90s, writes tenderly of her mother, who was a Russian Mennonite refugee in the 1920s. Sarah struggled her whole life to understand her mother's obsession with that shattering of experience of being compelled to leave Russia, the homeland to which she had been bound. My mother, Sarah writes, throws nothing away. She has fingers fashioned to gather small, hard seed from fruit that's overripe, hold it a while in her closed hands and hide it from the wind. Everything adheres to her. Last year's calendars, lacy patterns for crochet, pineapple, and pinwheel, weeks of yellow bulletins saved from the Brethren Church, envelopes bills were mailed in. She collects them with her whole heart. Keeps newspaper pictures of kings and queens in boxes under her bed, their posed smiling from balconies on wet moors, walking their dogs, or waving sadly from a yacht in Yalta. She tells me she's had to abandon too much in Russia. Scent of apricot blossoms in April, the green silk dress her mother made, shade of a twisted oak, rough-branched, rooted beside rivers, friends, and the graves of sisters. The leaving was hushed and final. Furtive last words, prayers spoken embracing the train's shadow. She tells me how full their hearts were of fear and emptiness, how they breathed the last thin smoke from the village, how little they could carry in their clasped hands. Sarah Clausen is not alone in recording memories of Mennonite parents who knew a world their children struggled, or not, to comprehend. Like me and our own David Waltner Taves, hello David, who also writes moving poems about his mom and dad, Sarah grew up in the Mennonite Brethren community of Northeast Winnipeg. Her Manitoba colleague, Patrick Friesen, grew up within a fairly strict Kleinigemeinde Mennonite community in Steinbach, the prairie town also the hometown of Canada's most prominent novelist, Miriam Toews. Patrick Friesen once remarked to an American fellow poet that if he ever met a Mennonite in New York, he'd invite him to the corner bar or restaurant to find out who his relatives were. And then, Friesen remarked, they could discuss how exactly each of them is lost. Friesen writes a lot about lostness and about seeking, about, as he puts it, the man who longs for paradise fails to be able to embrace it because his arms aren't long enough. As a young man troubled by his father's unrelenting pressure for Patrick to become a certain type of Christian believer, Patrick made a deliberate choice not to sing, ever, in any context. For him to refuse to sing was to refuse the coercion he felt to be in harmony, as it were, with everyone around him in the Mennonite town and congregation in which he grew up, which he felt was smothering him. And so he maintained some autonomy by remaining silent until his father died, and then began to appear to him in dreams. These experiences compelled Patrick to revisit his particular sense of lostness and to make some moving declarations about it. With reference to Elijah, the prophet, who at one point hears the still small voice of God and then is finally carried directly into heaven by a whirlwind, Friesen writes an evocative poem addressed to his father. Pa Poem 5, Singing Elijah. I wanted to tell you what I'm doing. At least be ready when you come around at night. I tried to remember what I was thinking or doing when you left, and not much really changed. What was true in 1971 is still true. Nothing happens day to day, does it? Nothing new. Yet some things need saying. We both knew I almost said the final thing. You wanted to stop your ears, but I never did say it, not to you. It would have hurt you then, and you would have thought the last days were upon us. But now I'm saying it because you came to me, and maybe it's what you want. Jerusalem is dead, stone Dead Sea dead, something old men dream as they gaze into empty days. There's nothing new here. People have lived this desolation for years. There are not many of your kind, a handful, who still believe as if 2,000 years hadn't occurred. That's how it's supposed to work, isn't it? The crucifixion then and today, nothing between. You were a mystery man, Pa, lost in some kind of miracle. But you received the law like everyone else. You were found. And you thought your children must be found, uprooted into light. I can't speak for the others, almost don't have the heart to speak for myself. Think of me as lost, living with one foot in the shade, trying to be true and double-crossing you every step of the way. It's something to live with. These days, I'm poking around again, though. Found the old grounds and the grave. Pa, I sang Beulah Land the other day. Sweet, sweet Beulah Land. Just thought I'd let you know. I'm starting to sing. No one's really heard me yet, and I'm not singing Jerusalem. I'm singing Beulah Land. I'm singing Elijah, because I see ahead where I shed my clothes, maybe hang them in a closet, and disappear. I love poetry for the insight it gives us about the most stirring, intimate moments of our lives, and for its ability to offer not only a captivating shorthand view of the intimate world of our everyday, but also condensed perspectives on the broad strokes of the macro world. Poetic discourse has the capacity to focus the imagination and stir us to see the ordinary in extraordinary ways. Sometimes it draws us away from the messy and frightening parts of our lives and gives us space to breathe. Other times, it compels us to reflect freshly, on the disturbing, unsettling conditions of the larger world in which all of us struggle to carry on. The larger world. When we think about the threats of destruction embodied in large conflicts, we often get lost in grand ideas and ideologies that keep us focused on things far away. We don't necessarily make the connection with people close by. That is, until those grand-scale threats actually confront us. Walter Brueggemann, an influential Protestant theologian, once observed that large ideological realities rob us of our capacity to speak, our capacity to care, our capacity to notice. To feel empathy and inspiration, to experience reflection, discernment, delight, wonder in the grand landscape of our lives as human beings on this earth, we need to be up close. That's where poetry lives. Poet Edwina Trentham grew up in Bermuda and knew just what to do in response to an impending natural disaster, like a hurricane. Then one day during the Cold War, when a nuclear attack seemed more imminent than we've thought of it in years since, her young son, Ben, came home from school with a sheet of instructions about what to do in the case of a nuclear attack. With the familiar paradigm of the hurricane in mind, she shuddered to imagine what it would be like to experience this other sort of storm. When I was a Bermudian child, September was always a promise. Dark sunlit days of oil-smooth breakers rolling silently into the shore, deep turquoise refusing to reflect the charcoal sky, and I recall just what to do. Close the shutters, but leave one window cracked on the lee. Hide all garbage cans and wicker furniture from the wind's clatter. And always make sure everyone is in the house long before the hurricane hits its stride. This one has no season, no sure signs, though I find myself scanning the sweet blue overhead too often, dreaming those dark, lazy arcs of extinction. And oh, Ben, the pamphlet you brought home from school is quick to say exactly what to do in an emergency. Stay in the house. Close doors and windows. Don't eat any food from your garden. Don't use furnaces or fireplaces. They draw air inside. And above all, don't try to gather your family. It's late. Our forsythia has lost the scarlet cardinal. A half moon howls lopsided in blue-turned slate. And I have spent the day trying to imagine, trying not to find you. In the dark times, will there be singing? Asks the German writer Bertolt Brecht. Yes, there will be singing about the dark times. Poetry has long been recognized in the Christian tradition and many religious traditions for its potential to inspire and transform, for the possibility that it might open the door to mysteries, to revelation. We need to find ways of looking at the world beyond the ways that are given to us in popular culture, in social media, and on the news. In ideologies and dogmas, in all those instances where we don't make a sufficient effort to ponder, to take a closer look, to question, to write back. It's the poets of our day who might help us break through the crust of convention and conditioning and allow us to glimpse something new, despite our immersion in a world dominated by habits of mind that resist a certain kind of probing, that don't bother to try to imagine what else is possible. A prominent subject of poetry as witnessed in recent times has been the experience of refugees. About 10 years ago, Warsan Shire, the Somali British poet who was named London's first Young Poet Laureate in 2013, wrote a compelling poem on this subject, refugees, a poem that went around the world. This long poem, some of which is too raw to present here, reads in part. No one leaves home, unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. Your neighbors running faster than you, breath bloody in their throats. The boy you went to school with who kissed you dizzy behind the old tin factory is holding a gun bigger than his body. You only leave home when home won't let you stay. No one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one spends days and nights in the stomach of a truck feeding on newspaper unless the miles traveled mean something more than journey. I want to go home. But home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of a gun. And no one would leave home unless home chased you to the shore, unless home told you to quicken your legs, leave your clothes behind, crawl through the desert, wade through the oceans. No one leaves home until home is a sweaty voice in your ear saying, leave. Run away from me now. I don't know what I've become, but I know that anywhere is safer than here. Poems, Adrienne Rich has said, name and mourn damage, keeping pain vocal so it cannot become normalized and acceptable. And yet, according to Catholic writer Michael Leach, even while poetry imagines the unimaginable, it evokes what is good and beautiful and true. In the midst of all that disturbs us, Polish poet Adam Zagajewski writes, we should strive to find wonder in the wounded world, to find beauty amidst destruction. Zagajewski's poetic vision of a broken world still worthy of love appeared on the back page of The New Yorker immediately after 9/11. The poem was written before 9/11, but it spoke to people then, and it can speak just as well to us now. Try to praise the mutilated world, he writes. Remember June's long days and wild strawberries, drops of wine, the dew, the nettles that methodically overgrow the abandoned homesteads of exiles. You must praise the mutilated world. You watched the stylish yachts and ships. One of them had a long trip ahead of it, while salty oblivion awaited others. You've seen the refugees heading nowhere. You've heard the executioners singing joyfully. But you should praise the mutilated world. Remember the moments when we went together. We were together in a white room and the curtain fluttered. Return in thought to the concert where music flared. You gathered acorns in the park in autumn and leaves eddied over the earth's scars. Praise the mutilated world and the gray feather a thrush lost, and the gentle light that strays and vanishes and returns. I'm struck by the scripture we read earlier by God speaking to Elijah with what we've come to call a still small voice, and by the fact that the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Corinthians should write so poetically, so lyrically about love and human understanding. We might do well to celebrate the instances when people who have something profound to say speak differently so that we can truly hear and freshly understand. Finally, to close, a short poem called Praying by perhaps the most popular and most accessible poet of recent decades, Mary Oliver. Praying. It doesn't have to be the blue iris. It could be weeds in a vacant lot, or a few small stones. Just pay attention, and then patch a few words together. And don't try to make them elaborate. This isn't a contest, but the doorway into thanks, and a silence in which another voice may speak.